Hello and welcome to Stampscaping 101. We're going to try something here with some vellum, some more what I call blocking out, and this is to kind of avoid the need for careful masking or the trimming of a certain type of image to match with a background image. In this case, it's a photo print. Okay, so I'm going to be using one of the nature sets here that has the large covered bridge, and I'm looking at the photograph here, and you can see where the darker area of the photo affects the imagery down below. Okay, so if we want to pair these together, if we were to stamp it on a white piece of paper or something like that, cardstock, we would have to cut that image out to whatever, glue it or tack it down on that photograph somehow. Okay, so this is a way to kind of, I don't know, work around that, and the vellum is a perfect opportunity for that. Okay, now on the covered bridge, the road ends at one point in time, so I'm just filling in with some additional sedge filler here, and I'm just showing how these trees can be used as bushes in the foreground here. I didn't get really good impressions here because I didn't take the time. One of the things on vellum that you should do is you should hold the stamp to the surface for a little bit of a longer period, because the vellum, while being porous, is less porous than, say, something like a cardstock. So you have to hold it down a little bit longer for the ink to transfer. Now, I didn't bother doing that, so you know, the bottom down below is kind of a jumbled mess right now. Now, with the fences here, I do want to get a good transfer of ink, so I'm holding it down for a longer period of time because I want those to be nice and prominent and very dark in terms of the impression. Okay, these fences are from set number 26. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a certain portion of this fence now that I'm about to stamp, because I don't want it to circle around, and I just want that straight vertical part of the fencing. Okay. All right, now I keep having to change my my blotter paper underneath my scene when working in vellum, because you can always, you know, you can see right through it. Okay, now this is the back side of the vellum, and I'm just going to do a little bit of preliminary coloring on the back side of it, just with some very light tones, light values of the hue that I will eventually use. Now you can do this or you don't have to. I'm going to do, you know, the majority of the coloring with colored pencils, okay? All right, so there's just very light hues of brown. Now I'm just checking to see where do I want to place this photo, okay? The photo is 4 by 6, and the piece that I'm doing here, the vellum, is 5 by 7, so I'm marking where I think I might want to use, or where I do want to use, that photograph in the background. And I'm seeing just how far down on the covered bridge I'm going to need to block out, okay? And you'll see what I mean by blocking out here in a minute. And I'll be using the Dr. Martens Bleed Proof White, Opaque White Watercolor Paint, okay? These bottles are really fantastic to have in your supplies, because that paint is a very unique type of paint. It's one that illustrators would all use, you know, to make edits on their pieces, you know, for their submissions, you know. A lot of things are digital these days, but traditional gouache painting and watercolors and whatnot, you can really change something on your piece, you know, with the art director's kind of instruction. Okay, so I'm painting this down to about that line, about where that photograph is going to go. You don't need to do the whole thing, because I'll just put some white paper down on the lower end of it, okay? All right, so you got to heat set that. This white Dr. Martens Bleed Proof White really dries very quickly. It's almost like white out in some ways. but you know, if you did get a decent application of it, you have to heat set it. All right, so just checking it now, and now that blue does not show up in the trees or the you know, the covered bridge, and it's blocking out that background. So now we don't have to, you know, cut that out or something of that sort. Now I didn't go down low enough. You should go down a little bit lower than what, you know, you maybe think you'll need. So I'm just painting, you know, maybe another 1/4 inch or so lower, just to make sure that I cover up all of that part of the photograph that I'll be spray mounting this on top of. Okay, making my assessment here. Now that's a piece of white cardstock down below, so I'll just be pairing those two pieces right and back of the vellum like that, okay? It's a little twist on photo stamping. On photo stamping, you know, the photos are being stamped directly on top of with either like a water-based or like a StazOn type of ink. But dye-based inks work just fine on photos. Okay, now look at that. I'm showing where my spray mount kind of came out with a glob right there, so I'm just going to remove that glob of glue. Spray mounting is kind of a messy process. It's not one of my favorite types of things to do, but it's very effective in terms of you know, what it does do, and that's give a really quick and even application of adhesive to whatever you want to glue down. So with vellum, because you can see through it, you want to give a pretty light coating, and I don't know, sometimes I don't get that. You got to work out all those little ridges and bubbles too, so just be careful about that. And now here's the cardstock that has some of that spray adhesive on there too. I got a better coating on that cardstock than I did on the photo. A lot of times I'm doing these things at night and I can't see, so you know, I can't tell how much spray adhesive is being applied to the pieces. So brairing down. I kind of glued down that surrounding area, but that doesn't matter because I'll be trimming off all of that surrounding excess area. Okay. And I kept having to fight that one little ridge. You'll find that with vellum sometimes, just like that one little ridge that I'm kind of working at with my thumb there. I don't know, it just kept appearing no matter how many times I kind of plop that down. There's like almost like a vellum memory or surface memory that kind of, you know, gets created. And I don't know, sometimes it's hard to get those things. It just wants to spring back up again, almost like it's kind of like plastic, which you know, kind of thicker vellums feel like. It feels like a plastic or something like that. All right, so just trimming off the surrounding area, returning the area back to 5 by 7 roughly. Okay, I might have trimmed off a 1/16 of an inch off each side, but who cares? But I'm just showing right there where the bleed-proof white was painted down towards, so it's just one continuous area of background white right down to the bottom of the page now. Now we have a perfectly good canvas here to in which to apply our tones. I'm just showing where some of that spray adhesive kind of, you know, went on thicker. So you can see a little bit of a texture there where that thicker bit of spray adhesive shows through. To me, it's just, I don't know. If I fine-tune it and take more time, get a much finer mist of spray, then it won't happen, but I'm not worried about it at this point in time. I'm just kind of more curious about the techniques and the surface and media combinations and what will work or what won't work. Final results, I mean, of course I want a good-looking final result, but that's not kind of the first and foremost thing on my mind. Kind of learning something new is, to me, the most important thing, especially when we're doing some kind of experimentation. Okay, now, I have this range of tones, values of each hue that I'm going to be working in. So I'm planning on some browns and greens. So I always recommend to people that you just kind of pull those colors out that you want to work with. And with colored pencils, I work from light to dark, okay? So I'm grabbing the lightest version of the browns that I have. I should probably be working more like a tan or something like that. But the thing with colored pencils is you can always use kind of a lighter touch, and you can get a lighter version, a very light version of whatever value that you happen to be working in at the time. Okay, now one of the things with like a covered bridge, it's supposed to be a three-dimensional object, so I like to vary the values within that piece. A lot of people will see something like that, and they're used to doing outline styles of images that are flat, okay? But images that represent three-dimensional objects, what you want to do is you want to treat them differently, okay? So, like even on the road here, if you're coming from outline styles of coloring, where you color in kind of a space equally, it'll flatten out. But what I'm doing here, even on the side of that mill that I want to be darker than the rooftop, I vary my tones. You can see I'm leaving it a little bit lighter in the middle, like some of the planks of wood. I, make it a little bit darker. And on the road, you can see where I've oscillated it. It's a little bit dark, then it goes light, then darker, lighter. Not real dark, but just a little bit of tone. So see that? When you don't color in everything completely the same, what you're doing is you're coloring, but you're also lighting your scene because you're creating light through the use of shadow. So you're creating contrast like that. See that on the road? Doesn't it look much more dimensional than if it was all colored uniformly? Okay. And now when I'm coming into my darker tones, I use those a little bit less than I did with my lighter tones, and I get a little bit more selective. I start hitting the shadow areas. See, I'm still working out these little bubbles that keep kind of popping up. Okay, moving over to my greens, just going with a very pale green here, and using a very light tone. You can barely see kind of that green that's being applied in there because it's a light green to begin with, but I'm also using it with a very light touch, so I can get more coverage, okay? You can always go darker, but if you go too dark, it's, you can do certain things with colored pencils. You might be able to take an eraser and kind of work it off. They're not kind of designed to be erased, but you can do that. But, why get to the point where you have to erase something to begin with? Just go lighter and just build all of your areas out kind of incrementally so you won't get surprised. Okay, now you see I'm starting to move into a darker green. And just like on the road, what I want to do in these grassy areas is I want to apply this a little bit more unevenly, okay? If you treat that entire grassy area the same way with the same values over everything, so I'm showing you what I'm doing there. I'm just putting little plotches everywhere of, I don't know if that's a word, splotches maybe of green here and there. So I'm kind of reiterating what's going on in that sedge filler that I used in there. And what you get, if you color everything uniformly, like on that grass, it'll look like flat astroturf or something like that. What you're saying is there's no variation to it at all. It'd be like the difference between if you made your bed and your bed's, all the sheets are nice and taut on it, it's completely flat, and that's how you would color it, completely flat and uniform. But if it's like an unmade bed in the morning, your blankets and comforter or whatever, your sheets are all kind of rumpled, and that's more along the lines of kind of this wild grass. It's not like a mowed grass here. So what you do is you just treat it differently. You can put a uniform application of green over the whole thing, but then when you get into your darker areas, kind of hit more of the shadow areas, or apply things a little bit more unevenly. Okay, this is going into some black, and you can see where I'm kind of hitting it in some of the shadow areas. And you can see on that mill how I've treated each three sides differently. Okay, going in with a very light touch of blue here. And now I'm hitting kind of, so you can see those rocks in there. And I've created rocks in the design itself with shadows. So I'm hitting the darker color with shadows. Okay, now here's a little trick that I do. Here's a little bit of blue in my white areas that I've retained in my road or whatever. And that creates a little bit more continuity. If you just have it stark white, it looks a little bit more, I don't know, kind of barren. Okay, now this is going to, switching over to my acrylic paint pens, okay? Colored pencils, you work light to dark. Now with these paint pens, I want a foundation of kind of medium tones, okay? And then I'm working light. So with paint pens, you're working kind of medium darker to light. Colored pencils, you're working light to dark, okay? And the reasons why you work, or why I work kind of darker to lighter with the paint pens is because the paint pens are a little bit more, they're more opaque, okay? Now colored pencils, while they're not, you know, transparent like dye-based inks or something like that, the way that you apply them, they're a lot more transparent than, say, an application of acrylic paint, which these pens are here. So I want these acrylic pens, the lighter areas, to really stand out to make things look more rounded in terms of the forms. So you can see on these treetops here, when I move into my lighter tones, I'm kind of hitting it in the lighter areas of the tree. And you might ask, well, where are the lighter areas of the tree? Well, you can just look at the trees and you can see there's light areas and then there's shadow areas. So you follow suit with that, you know, as opposed to seeing it like an outline image. You see it as more of a kind of a modeled, non-uniform, plane, you know, surface. You know, it's not flat. Okay? So, kind of approaching these pens in the same way. You know, when I pulled my pens out, I pulled out a range of tones from, you know, yellows to greens. All right. So just grab all your pens and make it visual. A lot of people don't know what colors to use, okay? They're used to kind of keeping everything organized in their, whatever their pad holders or pen holders and things like that, and grabbing one pen at a time. But what I used to teach people in my classes is, you know, especially if you're just kind of learning lighting, is to grab all of your media that you're going to be using and put it in a line in a value range, and just line it up from light to dark, because you can make things visual that way. It doesn't have to be theoretical. Okay, now see, I worked from greens into kind of more of a yellow. Now this one's a lighter beige. It's getting pretty close to white here. I know it's very subtle, you can't really see it here in the video, but adding these little bits in here, now I'm adding it right on the top of the fence areas, the posts, and I need to learn the anatomy of a fence. I forgot what those things are called, but then I'm putting the highlights on top of. But some, you know, when you stamp that out, my fences have lighting in them, in the design themselves, okay? So what I'm doing is I'm just reiterating. Here I'm showing where there's light areas on top of the fences like that. It's not just a silhouette, so I've put dimension into all of my designs. So all you have to do is just look at the designs and reiterate it. Right here with the white pen, I'm putting some white on tops of some of those little rocks in the water. And again, those rocks in the water, a lot of them already have a light area and a dark area down below. So I'm just reiterating that now with the white pen. And look at that down on the road. See those little white dots on some of those rocks? Look how much more dimension that brings in a very detailed way to that area down there. And when you do that over enough things, it kind of brings the piece to life, and it makes it so much more dimensional looking in the end result. Even though it's very subtle, it kind of makes the whole surface kind of shimmer, okay? And from a textural standpoint, you know, having these little dots in there, it's really fun to do. And you can add visual interest and contrast into those areas by having a little sparkle of light, you know, kind of shining off of it. And if you look around, everywhere around you, you'll see what I'm doing with that white pen. It's called specular light. It's little reflective light, and you'll find it over your desk, over your computer, everything. Okay, now just to add a little bit of visual interest, I'm adding some little wildflowers, and you can see where I'm clustering them. I'm not just spacing them out a 1/4 inch evenly over everything, okay? Which is the habit with all of us, including me. So I kind of have to work against my, I don't know, kind of habit inside, or inclination. Okay, but so you can see that orange. This is looking at it at arm's distance, and that's how you would see it, but it's not like, oh my gosh, there's like orange dots everywhere. You know, when you look at a card at arm's distance, it kind of harmonizes with the background like that. Now later on, I'll think, when I finish off the card, I add a little bit more of a kind of a tan, so that I get a little bit more of a varied, I don't know, wildflower type of look. Okay, now for the sky up there, I think the sky looks fine as is, but we can bring in a lot more depth into the piece by adding in some foreground. And here's another stamp that comes with the set. I want these to be nice and dark, so I'm holding the stamp to the surface for a little bit longer, allowing the, in this case, Brilliance ink to transfer and kind of start drying like that. So see, I get a nice dark impression that way. You can see it's quite a bit darker than those fences. Maybe I didn't hold the fences down a little bit longer. But one of the things about pigment inks too, when they dry, I don't know, for some reason they look like the black looks lighter than what it does now. So it might not be that dark in the end result. Maybe if I spray seal it, it'll bring back a little bit of value. I'm not sure. But you want it as dark as possible. Just so take your time, allow the ink to transfer. If you pull it off too early, it works like a vacuum in it, you know. Sometimes it comes right off. Okay, so here is some Brilliance White being applied with a cotton ball. And you can see in the distance there, see the little mist in the background? Look at how that kind of illuminates that area. But what we're also doing right here, when you use vellum, it's already kind of a softer look than if we were doing the scene on like a glossy cardstock or something of that sort, even a matte cardstock. Vellum just gives kind of a softer look to everything, but when you're applying this little bit of fog like this, that it makes it look even softer in the areas that you're applying it. Now this looks more effective if you don't use it everywhere. So just like I like to oscillate lighting and shadow throughout my pieces, not coloring everything uniformly, I'd like to do that same thing with this type of fog effect. So what you'll see is I'll use it in one area. Now see that it's one area, that fence, but the back, you know, the area closest to the side I'll leave as is, okay? Because it's just so much more effective to play contrasts against one another than just to do it, you know, over the entire thing. Now, if you like it, then use a little bit more, you know. Okay, now I decided, okay, I'm going to use a little bit more on that fence, but maybe in the foreground fence, maybe I'll leave that, you know, a little bit more as is. Okay, so I'm just putting a little bit down here on this fence, but I'll leave the top part as is, okay. But look at that road there, though. See that varied application of the browns in there? Look how much more effective that is. Now, my sedge filler and texture, when I was originally laying out the scene, it wasn't a good application of that. I wasn't taking my time on the vellum, you know, to get really good impressions. But you can see here in the end, by the time you add in all your colors and everything, it doesn't really matter. Okay, adding some of this on the tops of the trees, just to vary the trees. Now, doesn't it look like lighting is hitting the tops of the trees now? Okay, and you can see those little white highlights down in those rock areas down below. There's my little flowers down there. I was starting to think, those flowers are a little bit too dark. Okay, so I'll work on that later. Going to matte this now, or mount it. Okay, and that's just a piece of cardstock again. I wanted to have a little bit of a border, so I'm leaving that area around the side, and I did spray mount this one just to get a nice even coating. When you use this type of system here, when you're, you know, using vellum and spray mounting it, it can get a little wobbly, you know, like it's kind of like you're working on a warped surface, and then, you know, we're heat setting things, but then when you end up mounting it again, you know, it kind of flattens it out. Now here I'm just using some whatever crafter's tape. I didn't want to go out and do another layer of a spray mount, so I just do a cross pattern here, And this is a piece of Stardream lapis lazuli. And this one right here, I give it a little bit more of a border than, a lot of times I typically do. I'm just eyeballing things. I could probably get more accurate if I kind of measure things off, but I'm not bothering with that. I just try to get it as straight as I can. And inevitably, it's not really very straight, but it's straight enough. And this bottom portion, I typically like to leave a little bit more space than on the top and both sides, just to kind of give it a little bit more visual weight on the bottom. So a little bit more, but again, it's just eyeballing it. Okay, now right in here, this is where I go in with kind of a tan, or a pale orange, which is of course related to orange, shaking up the pen here and getting it to flow. This is the first time I've used this color. And we're going to go back into those orange clusters, and I'm going to give it a little bit of a change in value. So I'm not trying to hit, exactly those where I put the orange dots, but I just want to cluster in kind of a little bit of a lighter version of orange into those areas like that. And there you have it. Okay, blocking out with vellum. Hope you try it sometime and have fun with it. Thanks so much for watching the video.